Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps.
It was December 1977. I was 14 and a half and a freshman in high school. I stood at my locker turning the combination outside the gymnasium at Runlet Junior High School in Concord, New Hampshire, where I live. My stomach was clenched. It felt heavy. I felt slightly nauseous. I was anxious enough to be slightly hyperventilating. I was also exhilarated and excited. I felt like I'd finally arrived. As I turned the combination, the girl who had her locker next to me, Margie Hicks, asked me if I was okay. And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, I'm okay. I just have some cramps." And she looked at me and stared for a minute and said, You got your period?" And my face flushed and my heart raced and I started to cry. And I said, "Yes, I finally got my period." So here in episode 178, I'm going to talk a little bit about periods, my period mostly. I've been researching information and movies and documentaries and cultures and beliefs around menstruation and women in their place in society as menstruating humans. It's too much to put into one episode. It's too much to cram into different subject matters. It's pretty astoundingly huge, quite honestly, and one of the least comfortable and minimized and maximized topics ever. Men don't want to talk about it because, that's lady stuff, which makes it unimportant and unbelievable and psychosomatic. Women don't want to talk about it because they don't want to draw attention to their vaginas, their smelly, bloody vaginas, right? Little girls looking forward to or dreading the onset of it don't want to talk about it, except maybe with each other and reluctantly with their parents, because it's uncomfortable and creepy and hard to picture and a little bit terrifying. Little boys are seldom told about it, so they have no idea what it means. And when they do figure out what it is and what it means, are mostly disgusted by it. Menstruation. Probably one of the most empowering and powerful and meaningful physical functions the female body does every 29 days or so. So if there are roughly, 12 months in a Gregorian year, and the average woman menstruates for 30 years, 360 periods, 360 times. Women have to put pads in their underpants, tampons up their vaginas, heating pads on their bellies, Tylenol or ibuprofen in their tummies, missed days from work, missed days from school, showers, not baths, declined invitations to pool parties, saying no to sex, saying yes to sex, being told, "Oh my God, that's disgusting," worrying about leaking through your clothes, worrying about health problems, worrying about not getting it. "Oh no, am I pregnant?" Then getting it and being disappointed that you're not. To say that menstruation and having a period is a huge, everyday thought process and active part of a female-bodied human's life is an understatement. Some women start it when they're little girls. Others not until they're teenagers. Others never get it and then find out they have a whole host of problems. Some get it and it's minor and hardly a blip in their day-to-day life, and they carry on. Others have paralyzing cramps, giant blood clots, what seems like gallons of blood. It's life-changing. It's different for everyone. And like everything I've talked about in this podcast season, it is surrounded by beliefs, myth, information that is used to control and judge, information that's used to embarrass. One of the hardest things I have around the current feminist movement is that I find it very patriarchal. So much of feminism is making women equal to men, meaning men are the standard for equality. To have equality, we have to be the same as them, do what they do, live the lives they live, prove that we're as smart as them and as strong as them and as successful as them. And we buy into the fact that anything to do with being a woman, being a mother, raising a baby, feeding a baby with our breasts, menstruating, which, is a huge part of growing the baby. So anyone that's alive is here because the body in which they grew, their mother's uterus, menstruated. She went through that whole process, grew the baby, potentially fed the baby with her breasts, raised the baby, and now here you are, a grown adult, free to share your opinions, thoughts, and ideas on periods. So I did a quick Facebook 3, 2, 1, go everybody, asking my lady friends, first word that comes to mind when you think about having your period, and go. So to be fair, anyone with a uterus that has a period can answer this question. If you don't have a uterus, well, if you don't have a uterus and you're supposed to have a uterus, you might have ideas on periods, right? But this was a question for uterus-bearing female-bodied humans. I'm going to read them to you because it's telling. So I started, and my first word was empowering, and I'm going to get into my period in a minute and share why I say that. A friend of mine wrote hope. So this is a friend that desperately wanted to be a mom that was never got to be a mom. So for her, like for me, my period reminded me that I was vital and fertile and that I could grow life. And when I lost having my period, of course, it was right around Molly's death. I felt like my mother days were done and I was a mess. To me, it was significant because it mirrored, I had traumatic menopause. So I was having my period the week that Molly died. She was too, and Gracie was too. And then I never had it again, maybe 1 or 2, and then a bunch when I was doing IVF. But I've always, when I was, creating Jack and going through that process, I loved having my period. I loved that I was having it. It made me feel young and youthful. So a friend of mine who is roughly my age, her first word is ugh. She shared that she didn't have it for 2 months and now it's back. So she's likely going through menopause where it comes and goes and comes and goes. Another friend of mine wrote pain, and then in parentheses, but I no longer get one. Another friend of mine wrote endometriosis, which is a horrible, horrible, painful, debilitating disease of the reproductive organs in women. Never heard of it? Well, that's not surprising because it doesn't get much play. Treatment often isn't covered by insurance, and women are denied again and again and again that this is their problem. Another friend responded to that post the same. Then these 2 women are now having a conversation with one another about whether or not you're able to have kids. Oftentimes, endometriosis rules that out. Another friend of mine wrote relief. So maybe relief like, oh, good, I'm not pregnant. And she wrote, easy for me to say as well. My last one was almost 20 years ago. Another ugh. And this is another person who suffered from endometriosis, doesn't have children, years of pain, and having to plan her life around her period. Thankful it's over. That was another one. Roller coaster. I have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is another disease that is overlooked and downplayed again and again and again in women. And both endometriosis and PCOS are often treated with birth control pills, which do nothing to repair the problem. It just masks the pain. So the disease can continue to grow and wreak havoc in your body, but you don't feel it because the pill is good at removing the pain. Thank God it's no longer. Bye-bye. That was another friend's word. Annoyance. I hate the extra preparedness I have to think about and the dreaded symptoms that make me feel not like myself. 10 years done. Very happy with that. So most of the women that answered this are my age group or a bit younger, maybe 40 and above. So some still menstruating, some not. But the overriding theme here is what these lovely, beautiful women remember is how inconvenient and painful and difficult it was, right? And it's all the time, every month. That makes me a little bit sad because it's a pretty miraculous thing that happens. Part of it makes me think like we have women completely mislabeled and misread because I don't think male-bodied humans, if they had to menstruate once a month, would handle it the way women do. But women in society, generations and generations back, have been asked and expected to carry the burdens, that it's our job to make sure everyone around us is comfortable, safe, well-fed, feeling loved and secure, even if that comes at our own expense. And I know this might be a bit of a stray from menstruation, but it really isn't. I just don't think it is. I was born in 1963, so my mother's generation didn't even know what a period was until they had it. And I remember my mother telling me the story of her first period, how she got it at summer camp and had no idea what it was and was panicked, thought that something was desperately wrong with her, went to the camp nurse and was told what it was and given a pad with a belt that you attached under, put it on and then put your underpants over it so that she could, not bleed all over the place. But of course that meant she couldn't go swimming, right? How do you go swimming with a big fat pad? Period doesn't stop when you go in the water, so you don't want a trail of blood to follow you. Lots of girls' first experience is starting their period in a pool where the blood floats to the surface and it's following you and everyone knows what's happening. My first period occurred in the middle of the night. I knew exactly what a period was. All of my friends had their period. There were maybe 2 or 3 of us that didn't. And it was the fall that my mother remarried my father. I didn't want anyone to know. I especially didn't want my mother to know. She found out. I mean, it wasn't hard to, this dirty tampons in the toilet, in the bathroom and everything, and pads. So she found out, but I bought my own stuff. I spent 45 minutes in the bathroom trying to put a tampon in because I had a gymnastics meet and our leotards were yellow. And I wasn't going to wear shorts over it because you weren't allowed to. And I wasn't going to have a big fat pad showing in my gymnastics leotard. So I had no choice but to try to use one. What I remember most about that gymnastics meet is that my period was so heavy that I bled through the tampon like 4 times before I was up, before it was my turn to go. So I brought extra leotards with me. Our team leotard was yellow. And I remember going to one of the coaches to say, look, I'm having my period and I can't seem to control it. And I don't want to wear a yellow leotard in case I start to bleed. I didn't bleed, thank God, but it was unbelievably traumatic. When I finally told my mother, she wanted to sort of announce it to everybody. And I was infuriated. She told a neighbor's dad, my friend's dad. She told people, and I just felt like it wasn't her business to share that. I'm not sure if I shared when Gracie and Molly started their periods, not in a way like I did with my mother. It was a much better rite of passage back then, and it was an expected task of women. And we were taught, I remember in 6th grade health, that's the first time that we would have a health lesson, and it was basically called sex education. And the boys and the girls were separated, and the boys learned about smelly armpits and body hair and boners that they had no control over. That's what they learned about. We learned nothing about this, which in my mind makes no sense. What we learned about was getting our periods and growing boobs and how our bodies would change, and that it was our job to work extra hard to keep these changes attractive, to keep them quiet and secret. Now, I'm quite sure boys were told to keep their boners secret. I mean, you don't know, well, when now it's in the middle of math class that you have a boner you can't control. And I can't imagine that is fun or easy for boys. But sitting in middle school, in your desk in algebra class, as you bleed through your tampon and you feel it, and you know that you're bleeding everywhere, and there's nothing you can do because there's 3 minutes to the bell, and then that means the hallways are crowded, and so you sit in an ever-deepening puddle of blood, and you wait for everyone to leave. And then your 70-year-old algebra teacher, who you are scared to death of because she's strict and old-fashioned and scary, comes to your aid and ties her sweater around your waist and says, don't fret about the seat, I'll take care of it, and takes care of it. And I go to the bathroom. I went to the nurse's office and cleaned up and made the best of my situation and continued my day at school. I believe I called my mother and she brought me a change of underpants and pants. I'm lucky I had a mother to call. By this time I had shared with her that I was having my period. I remember it. I remember all of it. I remember almost every time I had an experience around my period. A TMI experience here is I was having my period when I lost my virginity. And I think that's the whole reason we did it in the first place. Things were heating up and I said, when it came time to, get undressed, I'm like, oh, I'm having my period, in a panic. And the response was, oh, perfect. So this was a person that, he was considerably older than me and had a child. So he understood menstruation, right? It didn't bother him. That was eye-opening for me. And it actually set in my mind a healthy expectation of how anyone in my life that I was sexually involved with should feel about my period. In later times and sexual experiences and dating and everything, I didn't have a lot of patience for people that weren't comfortable with it. Because if I have to put up with it and we're in a relationship together, then it's a shared experience. And I should be honored a bit and taken care of, not like, oh, she's ragging it, I remember being at my boyfriend's house in college and sitting on his couch and having a massive period. And I stood up to go get something and I had bled on the sofa cushion. I didn't know it until I got in the kitchen and he quickly cleaned it up and flipped the cushion over. And later that night, we scrubbed it until it came out. I felt so bad. I was horrified. And he was a bit horrified too. He's a bit shy, big family. It's sort of a creepy thing to have out there. It was awful. That was awful. One of my favorite period memories is I was on the starting line at a 800-meter race at Boston College. They used to have this giant track around the football field, but it was the 800. So I was in bun huggers and I was in a tank top. So bun huggers are like running shorts that elite women athletes wear that look like underpants. They are like a bathing suit bottom. We're on the starting line. And the way it works in an 800 is called a waterfall start. So you're back from the starting line And the starting official will say, runners to your mark, and you trot up to the starting line and you stand still. So we trot up and we stand still, and the starter puts the gun down and says, just a minute, please, just a minute. And he comes up to me. Now, you need to understand the starting line is right by the bleachers, and the starting line is the finish line. And there are hundreds of people in the stands watching the track meet. And he points to me and he goes, Barbara, I think you have a problem here. And I look down, and on the inside of each thigh is a bright red blood stain. So I was bleeding. So I had a tampon in. So I look down and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I look up, I'm on the starting line. I said, what do you want me to do? I can just run like this, because I didn't know what to do. And he goes, no, take care of it. We'll wait. So I looked around. So all of the girls in the starting line, for the most part, were supportive, but they all looked embarrassed. They all looked a bit irritated and relieved because it wasn't them. So I just turned around and yelled up to the fans, does anyone have a tampon? And so like 3 tampons got chucked down. So I picked them all up and I grabbed one of the girls in the race who was a friend of mine, and we went under the bleachers, and there was a big garbage can there. And someone also chucked down a towel for me. So I wiped off the blood off my thighs as best I could, licking the towel and rubbing it off. And I changed my tampon under the bleachers, took the bloody one off, put a dry one in, rubbed my underpants, rubbed my bun hunters to get the blood off as best I could, went back out, put my hands up, took a bow, and ran the race. I actually think I won the race. I took ownership of it. That experience could have been debilitating for anyone else in that situation. I just decided at a young age that I had put up with enough, and I didn't give a shit what people thought. You don't like seeing blood? Then become gay and only sleep with dudes because they don't have their period. That's kind of how I felt. I also remember more than once being so utterly paralyzed by period cramps that my upper lip was sweating, that I thought I was going to vomit, that I really couldn't move. And I would go to the school nurse. Now, granted, the school nurse was a generation ahead. There were a couple of different ones. Mrs. French was the best. She would initially say, it's just period cramps, well, just period cramps. Okay, so if the same cramps were diarrhea or the same cramps were something else, then they matter and I can lie down. But since it's my period, I'm supposed to just deal with it. That was the message. And I think sometimes that's still the message. I would ask for ibuprofen. Well, it didn't exist back then. I would ask for aspirin or Tylenol. And I would ask, could I please lie down for a few minutes with a heating pad? I remember once I was so sick I needed to call my mother, but the nurse's office was full of people, boys and girls, and I didn't want to say why I was coming home. So I'm like, Mom, you need to come get me. I don't feel good. So she asked me, what's wrong? And I'm like, well, I have a stomach ache. And she kept asking me questions. I'm like, Mom, just come get me. I have a stomach ache. So she finally sort of figured out what it was. That was high school, long before I was willing to shout out to a crowd of people who has a tampon. But I learned early on from the women older than me and from my peer group and the people teaching me about periods that menstruation was a really conflicting thing. On the one hand, it signified an amazing ability that only female bodies have. Our bodies are designed to grow life. And when the life comes out, we can feed it. And that aspect of being a woman, of being me, is big in my mind and heart and soul today as it was when I first contemplated it 55 years ago, when I was old enough to think about it. It amazed me. And I often wondered why, since we were the ones that could actually grow the babies, that every single human on the world grew inside the belly of a woman, that why were we the sex that wasn't given equal access and equal rights? It didn't make sense to me. At the same time, why did it come with such discomfort and mess and inconvenience and blood? And why, as I've gone through my 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, does medicine seek to minimize it, make it invisible, interrupt it, all in the name of healthcare, when really how I feel about all of that is that women are expected to buy into a very patriarchal view of life, that even though we're the ones that grow the baby, the person that causes us to be pregnant is the decision maker. I don't always know quite how to deal with that. I don't always know how that's fair. And I don't know that it is fair. And I don't know that it's so black and white. In my research thus far around periods, the most amazing thing I've found is that culture after culture after culture makes the period unhealthy, dirty, secretive, private, uncomfortable experience that women have to go through. And they have to go through it and they have to manage it. And great are the men that don't have to deal with it or that can separate themselves from it. And some of the practices in different cultures are mind-bogglingly misogynistic. There's a practice in Indian culture, Indian, not American, Native American, where women who do all the cooking and everything are not allowed into the kitchen while they're menstruating. And it's almost seen as a punishment. Like, look at you, you're not even well enough to do your job. I've only read a teeny bit about this, so I'm sort of making an assumption based on what I've read. But they're removed from the kitchen. I don't know that they're celebrated or pampered or cared for. I think everyone just waits for the period to end. There was a story about a woman touching her husband while she was having her period. Like, I'm menstruating and here I'm putting my hand on your shoulder. To make himself clean again, he was supposed to like drink urine. Like somehow that was less bad than touching the shoulder of your menstruating wife. Trust me, we're going to have a couple of episodes about the period. I don't know that there's anything dirty about a period other than the stains it might leave on white sheets. Blood isn't dirty. It comes from inside the body. Period blood is the lining of the uterus. It's what your child clings to, implants itself in, and develops into a human in. I'm not quite sure how you can rectify the lining of a uterus with dirty. I think in ancient biblical times, it was the easiest word to use to describe a menstruating woman. She is unclean. Clean meaning free of blood. So maybe blood is messy and that's considered dirty. It also could be a translation. I would love to see different translations in different languages and how that word is used in other languages besides English. Did I feel unclean when I was having my period? Sometimes, just because it's uncomfortable. And, if you're wearing a pad, then you feel like you're walking around in pee all day because it's wet and you can feel it. My personal experience when I was on the pill for a lot of times in my life, on again, off again. I tended to have really light periods or not get one at all. When I was in college, for the most part, I was not on the pill. I used condoms, or there was a sponge that you could insert up there that had like spermicide in it, and it was like a block. I used the calendar and didn't have sex on days I knew I was ovulating. A whole variety of ways to try to prevent pregnancy, and for the most part, it worked. I also had unbelievably heavy periods from day one. I've talked about this before, super heavy. So I very much didn't want to have my period when track meets were coming up. The other thing for me is the harder I trained and the fitter I got, the less and less intense my periods were. They very much responded to the intensity of my training, my percentage of body fat, my weight, which all goes into the female athlete triad, which is weight, period, and nutrition, what you're eating, and caloric intake. The pill, which prevents ovulation, I talked about that last week, oftentimes prevented me from getting a period whatsoever. I've had races that I wanted to do really well in that I didn't do well in because I was having my period. I've had races that I was worried about not doing well in that I did great in, even though I was having my period. I know as a mother, when Gracie and Molly began their periods, part of me felt bad. Like, oh, you're here already. And now this is one more thing you have to deal with. In their dance school, they have a dress code, pink tights and a black leotard. So if you're having your period, you're allowed to wear shorts, which is a relief, except that that's the only reason you can wear shorts. So if you're in a ballet class of 20 girls and 6 boys, and you walk into class with your leotard tights and shorts on, everyone knows you're having your period. In my mind, those shorts should be allowed all the time. You should always be able to wear shorts because you don't want to make an announcement that you're having your period, which goes back to the fact that in 2025, girls still think it should be embarrassing and secret and private for people to know that they're having their period. Periods are just as frequent as the common cold, as sneezing, as a headache. These are things that boys and girls experience. They're just as prevalent as diarrhea or being constipated or peeing yourself, right? It's not any less common and regular than any of those things. In my research for this, I watched the movie Turning Red. It's an animated Disney movie. I'd never seen it. I loved it. What I loved about it was a group of 4 girls, teenage girls, who are all in the throes of parental defiance and developing crushes on boys. And the main character, the protagonist, gets her period, Maylin. And it's sort of symbolized by this red panda. So now that she's a menstruating human, her red panda is released. It's her true self when she becomes overly emotional or agitated or angry or upset or super excited or filled with love. And the message in the movie is that you're supposed to tame and hide and silence your red panda. Put that part of you in a pendant and wear it, but don't ever express it. Pretty mind-boggling when you really think about it. When I look at modern day feminism, little girls and women every day, even in 2025, are really told to be quiet, to agree with what they're told, make nice, and don't make other people uncomfortable. I won't go into the million examples right now because I'm talking about menstruation, but that's one of them. So in the movie, Mei Lin is very, very beholden to her mother, who is an over-controlling mother that Mei Lin feels like she fails all the time, that her mother wants her to be perfect, and so she works her butt off to be perfect. And there's this whole ceremony around the red panda. So the red panda is unleashed when she gets her period, and that's how her parents know. And so her mother, of course, does the whole, oh, I'm here for you. Let me talk to you. And I was watching it with Gracie, and I'm like, oh my God, did I sound like that? Gracie goes, yeah, you did. And what else do? I tried very much with Gracie and Molly to talk about it very matter-of-factly long before they got it. But the panic in each of them when it finally arrived was palpable. And it doesn't matter how prepared you are. You're bleeding out of your hoo-ha. There's nothing fun or unfreaky about that. As the movie goes along, the tug between Mei Lin's relationship with her mother and all the traditions in her family and her friends and their expectations becomes insurmountable for her. And she decides that she's going to not hide her panda, which causes, no pun intended, pandemonium in her family. And so it's all the classic things. She sneaks out. She goes to a concert. The mother, if you've ever seen the movie New Year's Eve, there's a character named Piper, and her mother, Piper's mom, follows them everywhere and is hiding behind bushes, always making sure Piper's safe, and it's kind of a joke. Mei Lin's mother is a total Piper's mom. She follows her around and then embarrasses her again and again and again. The interesting thing about the red panda is when her other friends see the red panda, they don't know, especially the boys, don't know that it's associated with menstruation. And there's this boy that they're all in love with named Tyler. And he's having a party, and he knows that nobody will come. And so he invites Mei Lin if she'll come as the panda, because everyone loves the panda. And so she goes, and it's very empowering to Mei Lin to see that a side of her body that she's been told by her mother and generations before her must be contained and controlled is actually loved and revered by her peer group. So much of be yourself and don't be defined by, social expectations, right? Let your body and all that it does be a source of celebration for you and empowerment. It's not that black and white in the movie, but it's all sort of metaphorical. But in the end of the movie, so spoiler alert, of course it's a Disney movie, it's all going to be rectified in the end. Mei Lin finds out that her mother has a ferocious red panda that her father had witnessed. And her father feels very conflicted by this whole procedure. He fell in love with the woman with the crazy panda. That's who he loved. And he's seen her spend her whole life living in resentment and disappointment over control, trying to keep the red panda secret. And then Mei Lin's grandmother, her mother's mother, is the most controlling of all. In the sort of the culminating ending of the movie, Mei Lin's mother says, I've done to you what my mother did to me. I've been no different, and I'm so sorry. And so one of my favorite lines in the movie is, my panda, my choice. A play on my body, my choice. But essentially, anytime her mother tries to really control her panda, Mei Lin's like, no, my panda, my choice. I would like to think in 2025 that we can be more comfortable around menstruation, but we aren't. It's still a source of embarrassment and taboo. In a lot of the gender-neutral bathrooms where you have boys and girls using the same bathrooms and needing tampon machines in either bathroom and all of this is all incredibly uncomfortable for people. And, logically, I can see why. There are many female-bodied humans that really need single-sex spaces for these very intimate details. I know as a teenager, I had a hard enough time getting a tampon out of a machine in a ladies' room that a gender-neutral bathroom would have freaked me out. I would have gone to the nurse. That is not a judgment call. That is me being myself and acknowledging my fears. As a child abuse victim, I took a lot of solace in my girlfriends and my female-bodied friends. That was where I was safe. But it's, as much as it's out in the public more, it's as taboo as ever, which is unfortunate. Also, most girls and women hate it because it interferes with all the things that we're supposed to be able to do. So in the Netherlands and Italy, I believe, they actually have period pay, meaning for women who are having their period, if they need a day off because they're uncomfortable or bleeding heavy or not feeling well, they get paid time off for their period. It's extra sick days that men might not get. Because why? Male-bodied people don't have periods. They never miss work for these things, which leads into a lot to what I'll talk about in the next couple of episodes around period poverty and cultures that, vilify and put all this taboo on menstruation so women feel that it has to be secret and managed all the time. I know that in my life, part of getting my period made me feel very empowered. And that was my word, empowering, because it was a reminder that my body could produce life. Look at this, I'm having a period. That means my body was getting ready to grow a baby. When I would teach health, so this is a big thing I did, and I'm not sure that this happens at all anymore. We have a wonderful health curriculum at our high school, but I know the teachers, and I know quite well that most of them are not comfortable teaching health in the manner that I did or Amy or Julie did, the three of us, when we taught health at the high school. So when I would do the whole cycle thing, I made the boys memorize it as much as the girls. And our final exam was often out loud. I'd put them in groups, and the boys had to read the female questions and the girls had to read the male questions, meaning women had to read the things with testicular cancer and self-testicular exam and erection and vas deferens and ejaculation and cum and sperm. The girls had to read the questions with those words. And the boys had to read the questions with clitoris, period, menstruation, vulva, hysterectomy, labor, dilation, pregnancy, orgasm, anything that had to do with female anatomy and female reproductive health, cycle, ovulation, luteal phase, like all of it. They had to ask those questions. And the reason was the whole Me Too movement and the whole consent and healthy sexual conversations puts a boy and a girl in a room together with equal knowledge and equal understanding, which removes a lot of judgment. So if you're comfortable with your body parts and comfortable with the body parts of the person you're about to become intimate with, the likelihood of anything happening that shouldn't diminishes. It goes down. Little girls and women that are confident with their body parts, saying them, what they're for, describing them, are much less likely to be manipulated or taken advantage of in a sexual manner by someone else. My health lessons were oftentimes super embarrassing. I would tell very, very detailed stories. My consent lesson, I'll have to find out what episode I described it all, the vagina as a kitchen. In my life, there were many times that I hated having my period. Once in Newton, Massachusetts, and once in Woburn when I was teaching, I bled through my clothes. And someone had to say, Barbara, you've got blood all over your dress. That was one time. It was the teacher. That was in Woburn. And then I was substituting in a kindergarten class, and I had these white polka dot pants on. I didn't know I was going to get my period. And suddenly I had a searing pain in my gut and a rush of blood all over my white polka dot pants in front of 25 5-year-olds in a school I had never substitute taught in before. So fortunately, it was a kindergarten class, and there was a bathroom right there. And I said, give me 2 minutes. And I went in and quickly put a tampon in and wrapped my sweatshirt around my waist and went back out and taught the rest of the day in my bloody pants. What are you going to do? I didn't bring a change of clothes because I'm not quite sure why I didn't know I was going to get my period. I was usually pretty well prepared. But I remember these things. I remember being in Target in Concord, New Hampshire when I was in perimenopause in my early 40s. And I would get these massively heavy periods that would not stop bleeding. I went to my doctor twice and had a D&C, which is basically where he went up and sort of scraped everything out of my uterus right there in the doctor's office, filling a bedpan of massive period stuff. So then I had an IUD put in, and it took care of that, the perimenopausal, the heavy bleeding. I remember it because it's profound. I don't know a single man in my life that hemorrhaged out of his winky in the middle of a store or in 7th grade math ever. And that's not to be dismissive or mean to men. It isn't. But I don't understand why we aren't asking men to do what women do. Be equal to us, be on par with us, because our day-to-day life in our bodies will never, ever be as easy as it is to live in a male body. And maybe I've got 9,000 men that will tell me I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not a dude. I haven't lived all day in a guy's body, but I do know that any man that was told he had to spend 3 months in a female body, the thing he would dread the most would be the period. And I can't say that I blame him. I don't get it anymore. I will tell you, the 2 times it came naturally after Molly's death, I was happy, I was joyful, I was relieved, because it reminded me that I wasn't dead as a mother. And when Molly died, that's really how I felt, like just dead as a mother. Not that Gracie wasn't important, not the baby Gordy in heaven wasn't important. I just felt like my motherhood journey was being altered in ways that I couldn't control. When I started the IVF process with Jack and started taking estrogen and creating a cycle, I remember the first time I got a period, I was so excited. I'm having my period. I loved going to the store and buying tampons. I just did. That's how I felt. I loved standing in line at age, 55, 56, 57 and buying pads and tampons. I enjoyed it. And that's just me. Did I enjoy the mess? No. Did I enjoy the sometimes smell? No. Did I enjoy the cramps? No, I did not. I didn't like any of those things. However, I loved the fact that my body was working in the way it was designed. And I realized that that's an incredible privilege, that there are hundreds of thousands of women who do not get normal periods, have painful periods, have awful reproductive health issues. I'm lucky. I'm incredibly lucky. I have been gifted with a body that I love. And part of what I love about it is how wonderfully beautiful it menstruated for years and years and years. So the last period I had was in July of 2020 because it was the last period I had before I became pregnant with Jack. I have never had another one, and I know that I won't because I'm 61 years old. I do take estrogen every day. Menopause causes a decrease in estrogen. And what I find when I'm taking 1 milligram of estrogen a day is that my hands and knees don't hurt so much, that I have better mobility. My skin is better. I'm just healthier. And I think it's because estrogen is a youthful hormone. There may be a lot of health nuts and health related people that think I'm messing with my body by putting estrogen in it. Estrogen is a very natural hormone in the female body. So I guess I feel okay about it. It's a choice that I made, and I'm lucky that I have a physician that listens to me. So in upcoming episodes, I'm going to talk a lot about reproductive health issues that can affect periods and the clues our periods can give us. I'm going to talk about religious and cultural beliefs around periods. I'm going to talk about period poverty, which exists in every culture, everywhere in the world. And I'm going to talk about period stigma. So please, if you're a female-bodied human and have anything you want to add, reach out. And quite honestly, if you're a dude, a male-bodied human listening to this, I want to hear what you think too. Questions, opinions, thoughts, judgments. Knowledge is power, and I would love to hear what you have to say. I want to hear what you have to say about your periods. How old were you when you got it? Did it hurt? Did you bleed heavy? What's your most embarrassing period story? I want to hear them. I want to hear them all. We all have them. Female-bodied people, that's what I mean by we all. We all dread them. We all are relieved when they show up and we're not pregnant. We're all sad when they show up because we aren't pregnant. We bleed through things. We have cramps. We don't have cramps. We miss them when they're gone. We celebrate them when they're gone, and everything in between. All right, so be good to yourself. If you're having your period, take the day off, spend the day in bed, watch your favorite shows on Netflix. Be good to someone else. If you know someone else that has really heavy, bloody, awful periods, buy them some flowers or a McDonald's vanilla shake and French fries to dip in. The salt sugar thing, amazing. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.